Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast that explores the Great Resignation. I'm your host, Brian Akar. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the reasons they decided to leave their jobs during the pandemic and what has happened since. Hello, and thanks for tuning into this episode of the Why I Left podcast. In today's episode, I chat with Brad Hicks. Brad is a 25-plus year veteran of the sales industry who has driven multi-million-dollar growth in a variety of competitive markets. The pandemic gave him precious family time he had yet to experience, so he made the most out of this opportunity to align his values with his work, and now he's not looking back. Let's go check it out. All right, welcome back. Our guest today is Brad Hicks. Brad is a management consultant in sales with over 25 years of sales experience. Brad decided that it was time to better align his personal and professional life, so he joined the Great Resignation and is forging a clear path to accomplish this goal. Now, I'm excited to have him share his journey today. So, Brad, how you doing today? Thanks for joining.
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Of course. So now, prior to us talking a little bit about the Great Resignation, would love to hear a little bit more about you, where you're from, and where you currently call home.
Yeah, you bet. Brad Hicks, you introduced me earlier. I am actually originally from Halifax, Nova Scotia. I was born in Halifax. All of my family was there, and so in 75. So that kind of dates me. I think it's great that I just said that. But we moved west to Calgary, Alberta, Canada in December of 79. I call her my aunt, but really she's my second cousin, but just based on age, I call her my aunt. She was the first female landman in oil and gas in Canada. So we moved west for greener pastures, literally, or other pastures, literally, and just for some more opportunity. So I've been in Calgary, Alberta ever since.
Very nice. And now, what have you been passionate about in some of the work that you used to do?
Yeah, so all of my work and my background is in sales, 25 plus years, holding an individual bag all the way up to senior management. But really what underpins what makes Brad tick absolutely is really helping clients with potentially better process and then underpinning that with technology and doing that in a formidable way. And, that gets me out of bed in the morning, for the love of sales. I absolutely really enjoy that.
No, that's great. And, prior to kind of getting into this latest venture, tell us a little bit about your work journey and what's worked well in the environments that you've been a part of.
Sure. Well, over that course of 25 plus years, there's been a lot of in-office work, like working out specifically of an office and kind of going out and visiting clients in a regional area and in a larger geographical area, whether it be Canada and the US. What worked really well for me after leaving like a senior management role responsible for sales and operations was joining a startup, an Australian-based con-tech startup. And I was one of their first Canadian employees. And it was really a fantastic opportunity. It was the first time really fully working remote. It took me a little while to get into some good cadence, I would say. Brad wasn't just doing his laundry during the day as well, too. Brad was actually doing the things that were important, which was kind of driving opportunity and meeting good folks like yourself, Brian. I really enjoyed that. That resonated with me. And it made a lot of sense. And it didn't matter that I was really holding an individual bag and driving revenue just based on myself. I like that, and that gave me the ability to kind of spread my wings a little bit, challenge me in terms of doing the things that maybe I didn't want to do as much as I should have, which was the administrative tasks and getting that calendar set, getting that cadence set. And as soon as I did that, the world opened for me. It's provided a tremendous amount of opportunity. I was a part of a startup that was eventually acquired by a larger software company. It created that independence for me that made good sense. And it was a very, very good time. So that was kind of back in 2014.
Okay. And now what is it about sales that really, really gets you going?
I think, I'm a very large advocate of the power and the importance of EQ. And really connecting with people, understanding what their pain points are, and really driving solutions forward with them in a partnered way makes good sense for me. And that, you can call it sales or a sales process or human connection or other, but I really enjoy that about sales specifically. And it's really less about the product or service or software, but actually helping folks and seeing it through, seeing the impact, if you're talking about relative TCO or ROI, but actually being able to see that happen. For me, nothing feels better than that. And then on top of that, if you attach that to something that happens as a result of, so maybe it's expanding a terminal, building a wastewater treatment plant, being able to actually see that happen, for me, nothing feels better than that. To see that, somebody used the process and technology that we talked about and essentially were sold on, if you will, and then seeing it in action, you actually drive by that asset and say, hey, I was a part of building that asset, not specifically with my hands, with some good process and some technology.
No, that's awesome. So it's like start to finish, right? You see the idea, someone has an idea, they trust you enough to buy what you're selling, and then boom, there's some tangible product or asset that I could definitely see how rewarding that can be.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of draws you back to, maybe how you manage your personal finances or your portfolio, and maybe an asset sits in that as well too. Whenever you want, if you want to actually go have a real close look at your portfolio, you drive by the rental property that you own. Right. What's better than that? And so it's very, very similar. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. So I'd love to take you back in time, right? So let's go back to March of 2020. And now here in the US, things really come to a standstill. And so would love for you to talk a little bit about, well, obviously we were introduced to COVID here. What was it like in Canada, and describe how the pandemic affected you?
That's a really great question. Topically, situationally, and time-wise, so I had started a role with a holding company here local in Calgary. My second week was the second week of March. And so second week of March, so really trying to figure out what exactly the coronavirus is, what are the impacts going to be, both social and economic as well too. I was actually physically down in Las Vegas at a trade show. So I got to see the oddity of checking into each of the booths and talking to vendors and peers in industry, using a tremendous amount of hand sanitizer, looking at, social distancing, all things that were just incredibly foreign and that didn't really happen in that type of a framework. And so that started on a Monday. And then by Thursday, it was just trying to frantically book flights to get out of Las Vegas. They essentially had canceled the rest of this trade show where there's hundreds and thousands of people trying to get back to Calgary to try to figure out what exactly is going to happen next. So it was a tremendous amount of excitement. I guess there were some small camaraderie activities in terms of trying to do this together, as people and kind of forging together. But yeah, it was a very unclear time, and I remember it like it was yesterday.
No, definitely. And now, when you got back to Calgary, were the lockdowns similar in your area as it was in some places that you've probably seen here in the U.S.?
Yeah, it was very, very similar. Very, very conservative approach to what this looked like. Canada was very similar to Australia in terms of the lockdown. So rather, rigid, stringent. There was a small portion of time, like the summer of 2020, where we thought that there was a little more light there, and then we went right back into lockdown in the fall. So it was really trying to figure out. And, I was in an industry and seconded to a business that was very front facing. You drive into, say, like a gravel pit, for example, and you see the site, the site soup or the operator face to face. So you drive in with your truck and you see these individuals, and, these folks aren't, they hadn't been classically trained on utilizing technology like today in terms of recording a conversation or logging in and having a conversation like this as opposed to face to face. So yeah, there was some anxiety in terms of how that would work.
Yeah. And now, so what did you learn, as the pandemic was kind of starting around and really building up, what were some of the things that you started to learn?
What I think the silver lining was seeing, just witnessing the resilience of the human spirit and folks that, I didn't know if these folks just as I described, like these people driving into like these gravel pits talk about large aggregate crushing equipment. So equipment that makes big rocks, small rocks. If they could actually pick up technology to help them still continue to do what they do, but without being face to face, and the resilience and the willingness to learn, it was heartwarming. Folks that, were classically trained to spin a wrench and to keep people up, like uptime happening, those same folks were starting to adopt technology and learn how to use Microsoft Teams, for example, setting up meetings, working in PowerPoint to kind of get their point across in terms of what they were doing. I mean, it was something to see, and I didn't know if they would be able to do it, but they did. So I think it not only upskilled them in some of the other areas that would help them be more successful, but I think that it allowed them to step outside of their comfort zone and learn.
That's great. And now you'd mentioned earlier, you started a new role right when the pandemic began. So,
did, yeah.
So that's, welcome aboard first and foremost, right? But so what was that like, starting that role during this time?
Well, it absolutely deafened some of the immediacy in terms of what I would typically bring to an organization focused on the top line. But what it did, though, is it allowed me to kind of step back and really do a really great scan of human capital, talents, interests of the folks that were working there, and help them, empower them to be better, to look at the opportunities and head in front of them, to assist them with not necessarily accepting this was the new way to do business, but giving them the confidence with some, maybe a little bit of humor, but as well, some positive reinforcement that we can work through this and that we can do this, not just we, but they can. And that was a great learning experience for me as well too. I mean, I got better as Brad Hicks as an employed via the means of that process.
No, that's great. And so now, how did so you're in this role, you're starting this role. How did the pandemic start to affect your relationship with your job?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely blurred so many lines in terms of what we were doing. So it was a business that was recently acquired, to try to get some not only booked revenue, but shipped revenue. So like realizing that revenue is actually hitting the books was critical. But then it was, outside of that, it was rolling out, the policies and procedures around what work life looks like for all of those employees, and assisting with that from a governance perspective, a support perspective, and then, running through the entire gamut of the EQ and trying to keep people sane, if you will. So it really stretched me outside of, a typical responsibility, and then just to be like, purely empathetic along the way, where I was transparently trying to work through it myself, but working exactly the same with those folks as well. So yeah, it was not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of challenges, but that it presented, but it gave me the opportunity to really kind of dive into my work with those individuals specifically.
No, that's great. And so, what impact, if any, did that time, the pandemic, really have on your work in sales? Like, was it tougher to get that across the finish line, or like, tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, you basically had to retrain both, so internal and external retrain based on trying to define a sales process. Right, the sales process was essentially, grab your gear, jump in your truck, and and hit as many of these these asset owners, whether it's a pit or quarry or other, as possible. And that's really that was the de facto for 30, 40 plus years in the industry. Now it was retrain that thought process, try to get people's time to log in, potentially on their smartphone or God forbid, a laptop, to have a conversation around how they can do that. And because it was an essential service, the necessity was still there and the need was still there, but it was how to reach out to those folks before critical failure happened, which means there's downtime. They're not making any money. They're potentially losing money depending on what they're doing, if they're contracted. So it was trying to best empathize with the client externally, but try to create a sales process where to make it easy enough for them to be able to engage and to and to help them with, say, their equipment service or part needs, if you will.
No, that's great. And now you mentioned how the team really acclimated themselves well to technology. Did you notice something similar on the client side, like that they also upped their game?
Yeah, well, they had to.
Yeah, right.
So I mean, it was it was a evil necessity, if you
Mhm.
will, right? But yeah, absolutely. I definitely saw that. I saw a great level of maturity, internal and external, to try to figure this out, try to figure out this new way. And if it wasn't, and you'd walk through a conversation. So if you had, say, a conversational PowerPoint deck ready to go, and a client couldn't log in to, say, that Teams meeting for whatever reason, or didn't have their camera on, or couldn't see what was being presented, to actually formidably walk them through the storytelling and the process of sharing verbally instead, and creating a picture for them so they could actually try to discern what you were saying via the means of the PowerPoint just by voice. And I saw that on occasions, and where both parties understood exactly what was being said, exactly what it was, and there were still equal amounts of value that were driven through those types of conversations and meetings.
No, that's great. And like you mentioned, new skills were being developed and they may not have even realized it. So that's really good.
Yeah,
So now after being in this role, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you were in this role for about 2 years, right?
approximately.
And
Yeah.
so you decided it was time for a change. And it looks like you exited in around February of 2022, right? So as the show notes, why did you leave your job during the pandemic?
I think for many people, the pandemic gave people more time to reflect, to think, and good, bad, or indifferent. I took that opportunity to spend more time with my family, and specifically my son. So my son has a genetic disorder called Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and we don't know exactly what the rest of my son's timeline looks like. And for me, and we found out in June of 2019. So for me, that gave me more time to focus on my son, focus on that time, and then as well to focus on Brad. Right, I'm going to be a better father to my son if I'm a better version of Brad, and Brad's feeling great about what he's doing. So it put me in a position where I really focused on what was important, and our work lives. I mean, 40, 56, whatever the commitment to hours is a week, that's the lion's share of our time in our life in terms of what we do. So it better be rewarding. It better be fruitful, but not just in a fiscally fruitful way, but in a fruitful way in terms of quality of life and how you feel at the end of the day. And how I felt at the end of the day wasn't exactly who I wanted to be. And I had more commitments outside of work that I needed to be better. And that just allowed me to reflect on that specifically and help me start to discern kind of what I wanted to do. And that probably happened 6 months into the new role, I would say. And I stuck it out for better or for worse, because I was committed to people and I wanted to ensure they were getting what they needed. But at the end of the day, Brad wasn't. And I think that largely that was, where that kind of spearheaded the next step for me.
No, that makes sense. And so now to make that decision to leave, how did that impact you?
I felt like just a huge weight to just off of my shoulders. I felt almost free, if you will. Brad can mutually make a decision on who he wants to work with, how he wants to work with them, really set, and not set in stone, but like etch in stone, if you will, what that's going to be. And there's a lot of real estate left on the stone, so we may want to etch a different way forward. I may want to etch a different contract, if you will. So for me, it just gave me the flexibility to be a little bit more in control of what I wanted to do, work with clients, the clients that I wanted to work with. And if it didn't work out, say the first 6 months was very similar to the past role, is that there's a really great way to exit and move on to something new.
No, it's great. And so tell us a little bit about what has happened since you left.
So for me personally, and in terms of what I'm doing, yeah, I remember the day quite vividly. So I kind of went out to the market on LinkedIn and shared shared my story of my next steps, and the feedback was it was encouraging. It was very, very positive. I felt very good about it, and I remember thinking about it the night before. So it was a Saturday night, and then I think I went out to kind of everybody on LinkedIn on a Sunday. But I felt a little uneasy about it. A tad anxious, but really excited as well. And it was just the confirmation was there on the Sunday that this was the right time. I am doing the right thing. And I'd been asked for a long, long time, eventually, Brad, when are you eventually going to do your own thing? And I've got friends that are independent and have their own businesses, and they've created some, great independence for themselves and some good wealth for them and their family, and then just have a really nice quality of life. And always kind of looked at that and said, could that be me? And now it is. So I've got, I'm fully utilized in terms of what I'm doing right now. I love what I do. I've got some great variety. And then my thought process is, I don't know if Brad's going to be doing this for the rest of his employed career, but it sure does give me a great opportunity to see if I am going to jump back into a full-time role. I get to try out a whole lot of things along the way to help Brad make the decision that I'm actually going to do that again. So for me, that's empowering. It's very, very rewarding. And my contracted clients get the absolute best out of me.
No, that's great. And so tell us a little bit about kind of the work you've now pivoted into.
I help startups or scale ups really kind of move the needle in terms of their kind of ARR, if you will, so their annual recognized revenue. And I do that in a myriad of different ways. And typically it's in a net new vertical or a market. So I'm doing some work with an Australian-based Contech, and they're more of a scale up. So they're very mature in the Australian marketplace, but they wanted to enter North America. And I've got some great contacts in North America. I know the landscape really, really well. And it's just a great natural fit for me to be able to help them out. And I'm having a blast. It's it's new technology and some different processes that I wasn't kind of roll my sleeves up in, but I understand what the value prop is. There's some great opportunities, and we're already doing some really, really cool things in a short period of time.
Oh, that's great. And we've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs on this show, and would love for you to talk a little bit about how do you go about getting business?
Good question. I think my background is very helpful in terms of how I resource business. I mean, very similar to how, Brian, how you reached out to myself. You're doing the same types of things to get, to enrich what you're doing with folks like myself, telling your story so you can actually get it out to the greater audience. And very, very similar, I would reach out in context to folks. I do my research, do my homework, like every good salesperson should. They should really anticipate how the conversation is going to go. And if they don't, I don't like those variables. Some people are very, very good at that. I'm not. I like to be a little more constructive and pragmatic in my approach. So my approach was very pragmatic, and just, I know that I like Contech, for example. So who are the players in Contech that are starting to make some strides, make some good inroads, are posting some content that resonates with me on LinkedIn or other. And those folks, some of them would just, reach out to them directly, talking to them about, what does their North American plans look like, for example. So if they're in a different geography, or, what is their plan to scale? And I may or may not know some of these folks. And I think that that's been very, very helpful. But I will say that the majority of what I've done and what I'm doing right now was from my network. The old co-founder of the company, the Australian-based company that I started with in 2014, he got me connected with the Australian-based company. He's an investor, and got me connected with the leadership there. And a month and a half later, I was contracted and helping them, put the flag in the ground in North America.
No, that's awesome. And for those who may not be familiar, could you tell us a little bit what does Contech mean?
Yeah, so it's construction technology. It's just an abbreviated version. There's prop tech, so property management technology. There's mine tech, so mining technology. It's a little bit of maybe an acronym or a shorter version of what I do, but yeah, construction technology.
Oh, very nice. And so now overall, what have you now learned about yourself throughout this whole process, right? We talked a little bit about learnings through the pandemic, but now after you resigned, you got some good contracts, future looks bright. Tell us a little bit about, what you learned about yourself throughout this whole time.
I have a saying with my 8-year-old son, and I try to keep things as simple as possible. And you can't get any more simple than having a conversation with kind of that, well, within reason, with that kind of an age of a child. Is so when and his name is Parker, and when Parker struggles with trying new things out of fear, the conversation that I always have with him is, don't let the fear take the fun out of life. And for me, that just resonated so much in terms of what I was doing was, don't let the fear take the fun out of life, or don't let the fear take the fun out of the opportunity of maybe being happier, being more fulfilled. And for me, I just went right back to those conversations and that saying with my son in terms of what I was doing. And for me, like, that made so much sense. It was that I didn't do it before because I was fearful from it. I didn't know how it was going to work out. I didn't know what was going to happen. And for me, I'd like to know those things. I spoke about being very pragmatic before, but you don't know unless you try. And I know now because I have tried and I've been in it long enough, for the first kind of 6 months, if you will. There's no turning back. This is what I want to do. I'm incredibly happy. I've never felt this way in my 25 plus years. So for me, I feel like this is the best Brad. This is the best Brad today. And it's only going to get better from here. And I wish that I did it earlier.
Right. No, that's great to hear. And that message really resonates with me too. Look, I don't have a show if I don't have any guests, right? And so to your point earlier, I found you on LinkedIn and reaching out to folks, kind of stepping out. There was a bit of fear just reaching out to random folks online, right? I'm kind of, you're probably likely familiar in sales. My version of cold calling was cold messaging folks on LinkedIn. And so getting past that and then now getting through the launch, it's been really rewarding on my end as well. So I love that message that you share with Parker. So I appreciate you sharing with us. It's kind of a perfect transition into, one aspect of the show is really about advice for others. And so when we think about what, listeners who may be watching or hearing the show, what advice would you give to them who they may have a similar experience to yours, but really don't know what to do next?
Yeah, that's great. And I think topically based on how this meeting was set up and why you're doing what you're doing, Brian, is, there's a lot of categorization or nomenclature in terms of what this is, whether it's the resignation or the reshuffle or the reawakening or whatever. My sincere thoughts on it is that if you can't allow yourself to be the best you're not going to be the best employee. You're not going to be the best management consultant. You're not going to be the best Brian, if you will. So I think from my perspective and what I can share with those folks is that you need to start putting yourself first. And if you put yourself first, you'll be the best that you can be, whether you're employed or contracted or management consulting, any of those things. And I think that is it's a really fortuitous opportunity for these folks, is to put yourself first. Don't accept, what's considered the norm. Don't accept what is, that organization's culture or other. Put yourself first and realize what's important to you. So sit down and think about it, right? The old school pros and cons list or other, but really understand what's important to you and then do the things that are actually do it, right? Make the leap. Don't let the fear take the fun out of life, right? Jump in left side and try to figure that out for yourself, because even though it is incredibly scary and, you think about kind of going against the grain, if you will, but if you put yourself first, both in your personal life, in your professional life, I think that'll open, the sky will open up. And it's very generic advice, but it's very, very clear advice for those folks, is just think about you first. And if you do that, you will be the best. You'll be the best person, personally, situationally, and then professionally. So that's my advice for folks that are thinking about it or haven't thought about it, is think about yourself first, take care of yourself first, and then everything else will really start falling into place.
No, that's great. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
And now, what more do you think employers could be doing to better support employees,
Yeah, good question. What most people don't understand is that the employer is always going to put themselves first, right?
Right,
And
right.
and they always will. And they have to, whether it's because of their public structure, whether they're publicly traded and they need to kind of report back to folks and investors like you and I or other or public or private. But I think that employers need to understand that EQ and human capital, human capital is their largest expense always, and it always will be. And no AI or robotics or other is ever going to change that, because there's somebody that still needs to code that and still needs to do all those things, and it's a compliment, right? Is that they need to be employee first, and it's very critical. And I see some great messaging out there. I would say some of it is true and maybe some of it isn't based on my experiences, but I just think really focus on the human capital, empower those people to be the best people that they can be, and support that work-life balance. And then I think the largest thing is just trust that people will do and can do their jobs. Like, you hire them for a reason. Allow them to do their job. And whether it's at home, in the office, on the side of the coffee bar at Starbucks, allow them to do that. And I will say, when finally an organization really commits to that, same thing, the sky opens up for them, right? And then they'll attract the talent that they want. A good example of this, if I may,
of course,
there's a top 3 general contractor in Calgary, and they're a top 3 general contractor in Canada. And I follow their CEO on LinkedIn, and I love his messaging. Great messaging. He talks about people and integrity, and it really speaks about the projects that they deliver. And from the top down, I can see front facing that he cares, right? And for me, as a person that serves that industry, I want to work with folks like that. And so both from a management consultant and from services that I provide in my contracts, those for me are like low-hanging opportunities to work with folks like that. I look for his posts all the time. I read them. They resonate with me. They make good sense. But you can clearly see that he's not doing it just for the social impact. He's doing it because he actually cares. And for me, that resonates. That makes good sense. But so I think for the individual to kind of step out and be the best that they can be, I think the same goes on the side of the employer as well too. Is you can be better. It doesn't it's not a huge management of change, just to think a little bit differently around managing the most expensive portion of your business, which is human capital. Trust people, allow them to do what they're employed for or contracted for, and I think that there could be some good things that come from that.
Oh, great. And now, what's the impact that you're looking to have in this next chapter of your professional life?
I think it still kind of goes back to what underpinned the reason of what I do right now is helping people with better process and underpinning that with technology. But for me now, it's having conversations like this, Brian, resonate really, really well with me. I responded to your message rather quickly. We connected. I understood exactly what you were trying to do, and I put my hand up. Yeah, let's do this. And I think for me, where I'm at, both my age and maturity and kind of post-COVID, is that I'll help anybody as much as I can. And I think by doing things like this, by telling my story, listening to other stories, and really just getting a little more involved, for me, I think is what I'd like to continue to do. I mean, I'm always going to help organizations, drive better bottom and top line. I'm going to continue to do that. I love contact and other, but I think by doing those things, that really rounds out who Brad is, and I really enjoy it. So conversations like this today, helping people individually, one-on-one or other, I mean, I love doing that. And I think that that's been, very, very empowering over the last, 18 months or so.
No, that's great. So look, Brad, this was a really good discussion. I just want to say thank you. Thank you. One, for responding to my LinkedIn message, right? As I said, that's where I kind of live and get a lot of these interviews. So I want to thank you for doing that. And I also want to thank you for taking some time just to speak with me today. And look, it's been a pleasure hearing your story, and I'm hoping we could stay connected. I follow you on LinkedIn, and I love the stuff you post and share. So would love for you to get a chance to share where our listeners can support you.
Yeah, the easiest way to support me is, find me on LinkedIn. I'm active on LinkedIn. You need any help, you're thinking about something, reach out. I will respond, and I'll do my very best to get you what you need. But yeah, that's the best place to find me, Brian.
Perfect. All right. So thanks for that info. And look, that'll do it for today's episode. Again, I want to thank my guest, Brad Hicks, for joining me today. I'll be sure to share his information and where you can find him on LinkedIn in our show notes. So I hope you all have a great week. We'll see you next time. And Brad, thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
The Great Resignation, people leaving their jobs in droves. There's a lot of buzz happening in the job market of late. Now, did you or someone you know leave your job during the pandemic and want to share your story? We've been having some really good conversations in this space. So if you're interested, I'd love to have you join the program. If so, here's how you can do it. First, you can email us at hello@whyleft.co. That's hello@whyleft.co. Or visit us online at whyleft.co. That's whyleft.co. Look forward to having you join the conversation. Thanks again for listening to Why I Left. Be sure to join us next time for more stories from the Great Resignation. Visit us at www.whyleft.co. That's whyleft.co. And subscribe to the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.